Hi, it's Katrina. Pit of amputated arms. In 2012, archaeologists working near the German border in France discovered a pit filled with amputated human arms, fingers, and hands. Was this a leftover atrocity from a world war? It turns out that this pit was actually 6,000 years old. The team discovered the pit by accident while performing routine excavations in anticipation of a property development in the village of Bergheim. Altogether, the 5-acre site contained 60 ancient pits called silos, 14 of which contained human bones. But one of the pits was different from the others. Labeled pit number 157, the 6.5-foot deep hole contained at least 7 severed arms. The bones all bore amputation marks from a knife or an axe, and one came from a teen between 12 and 16 years old. After throwing the limbs into the pit, someone tossed in 7 human bodies, including 2 adults and 4 children, including a baby less than a year old, and a middle-aged man with his arm cut off, and telltale evidence of repeated blows to the skull that proved fatal. What the heck happened in this gruesome place? The dismembered body parts did not help experts better understand the ancient people's day-to-day lives, but instead reflect a singular event, according to archaeologist Fanny Chenal. Chenal and her colleagues failed to determine what caused the scary event, but they believe it was the product of warfare, judicial sentencing, or some other very deliberate violent encounter. Based on the wide variety of ages, some other group most likely came in and killed them. The unfortunate individuals found in the pit were likely farmers and animal herders who lived in villages, pointing toward a very dark side of the social hierarchies that existed among some Neolithic societies. Ancient pet cemeteries. The modern-day Peruvian capital city of Lima sits upon layers of past settlements dating back thousands of years. Here and elsewhere throughout the country, archaeologists have uncovered numerous graveyards containing the remains of both people and dogs, as well as sites dedicated exclusively to canines. The cemeteries date back between 900 and 1350 AD, when the region was inhabited by a pre-Columbian agricultural civilization called the Chiribaya. Often buried with toys and blankets, the dogs were laid to rest in separate plots next to the burials of deceased humans, showing that the culture highly valued man's best friend. The ancient people of Peru used their canine companions for herding llamas, and it appears as though humans and dogs were occasionally sacrificed. One particularly bizarre site, discovered underneath the Lima Zoo by archaeologist Karina Venegas Gutierrez, is filled with human remains bearing signs of torture and violence, showing that they suffered gruesome deaths. The dog skeletons lack these marks, suggesting that they were ritually strangled. As of 2015, scientists were working on trying to prove a genetic connection between the dogs of the past and the modern-day Chiribaya shepherd, but other types of dogs have been found at these cemeteries, including a small bulldog-like breed and dogs that still roam the country streets today. Neanderthal cannibalism. While investigating northern Spain's El Cidrón cave system in 1994, a team of archaeologists discovered the bones of 13 Neanderthals, including 7 adults, 4 women and 3 men, who were all relatively young when they died, as well as 3 adolescents between 12 and 15 years old, 2 younger children between 5 and 9 years, and an infant. A mitochondrial DNA analysis revealed that they were all related. The family died suddenly and at the same time around 49,000 years ago, and markings on their bones indicate that they were brutally massacred. Although the skeletons lack tooth marks, it's clear that their attackers used stone tools to butcher them, strongly indicating that the family was eaten. Some bones were broken to obtain marrow, skulls were shattered to extract brains, and others contained cut marks, flaking, pitting, and other telltale signs that the victims became someone's meal. Scientists believe that the Neanderthals who killed the family resorted to cannibalism to survive, and not for the more sinister reasons we attach to the practice today. The slain family's bones showed that they experienced nutritional stress resulting from a diet of mostly plants and little meat, so there is a good chance that the killers ate similar foods and also struggled with malnutrition. A new study in 2019 determined that the victims were not only related, but skeletal anomalies indicate that they were likely inbred. These findings present the possibility that inbreeding may have factored into the Neanderthals' extinction around 40,000 years ago. Human heads on stakes. Around 8,000 years ago, a society of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers lived along Sweden's Motala River, where they left behind animal bones, tools made from antlers, and human skulls mounted on stakes. The site is now known as Canal Jordan. Archaeologists first discovered the artifacts in 2009, ahead of the construction of a new railway bridge, and excavations were carried out 2 years later. The mounted skulls, all missing their jawbones, were found crammed into a densely packed layer of large submerged stones among the skulls of 9 adults and 1 infant, with animal bones surrounding the strange assemblage. It appears as though the skulls were deliberately placed on stakes before being put in the water, and the animal bones were sorted according to species. In addition to having a stake driven through them, the skulls showed obvious signs of injuries. Males bore evidence of blunt force trauma to the top of the head, while female skulls had trauma to the sides and back of the head. Interestingly, at least some of the damage had healed, showing that the victims did not die immediately after sustaining the injuries. Researchers do not know what kind of tool was used for harming the individuals, or if the violence was directly related to their deaths, but they determined that the heads were likely separated from the bodies during decomposition, rather than from decapitation. The brutal nature of these discoveries contradicts other Mesolithic hunter-gatherer burials, which tend to reflect a deep respect for the dead, and the reason for the gruesome mutilation of the bodies is a mystery. No other similar sites have ever been found, leaving experts with a perplexing prehistoric puzzle that they are still working on putting together. Bog bodies. A bog in Denmark is creepy in its own right. Situated on the country's Jutland Peninsula, the sparse, flat, mossy bog is eerily still, containing just a tree here and there. The discovery of over 500 remarkably preserved Iron Age bodies and skeletons makes it even spookier. Known as bog bodies, these human remains date back between 800 BC and 200 AD, and they are discovered fairly regularly. Many of them are found with their hair, skin, clothes, and even the food in their stomach intact, owing to the oxygen poor and highly acidic conditions of the layers of dead moss in their watery graves. One of the most famous bog bodies is the Tolland man, who had visible stubble on his face when he was discovered in 1950. Researchers have spent decades trying to learn about who the bog people were and why they died. Some bodies bear signs of extreme violence, including cuts to the throat. It was also unusual for the people of the time to bury their dead instead of cremate them, suggesting that the individuals were sacrificed as criminals, slaves, or even just for being commoners, according to National Geographic. A 2014 study challenged this notion after determining that some of the bog people showed signs of having traveled great distances and wore elaborate clothing from foreign lands, indicating that perhaps the opposite was true, that maybe they were sacrificed because they were highly regarded in their villages. There are no written records of Danish Iron Age people's religious beliefs, so it's possible that scientists will never know who the bog people were or why they were killed. Many experts do agree, however, that the victims were likely selected because they were seen as unique among the population. Bog bodies have been found elsewhere in Northern Europe, including Germany, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and Ireland. Man Bach. Around 4,000 years ago in what is now northern Vietnam, a very sick young man was buried at Man Bach, a Neolithic site south of Hanoi belonging to the prehistoric Fung Nguyen culture. When archaeologists excavated his grave, known simply as Burial 9, they found that unlike most of the other people buried at the cemetery who were laid straight, he was curled into a fetal position. In 2007, Dr. Mark Oxenham and Lorna Tilley discovered that the man's vertebrae were fused and that he spent most of his life crippled after becoming paralyzed from the waist down around the age of 12. His bones tell a story of suffering and compassion. His condition resulted from a congenital disease called Klippel-Feil syndrome, which robbed him almost entirely of the use of his arms, and he needed a caretaker to help him with basic tasks, including hygiene and eating. Remember, this was 4,000 years ago. Despite his overwhelming needs at a time when survival was difficult for absolutely everyone, he lived for another decade after becoming unable to care for himself, thanks to the compassion of his community, who tended to him around the clock. For the researchers, the dedication shown to caring for the disabled young man reflects uncharacteristic cultural traits at the time, including tolerance, cooperation, and the high value that the Feng Nuyen people place on health and taking care of loved ones. 15th century witch prison. 23 women and 1 man were tried and executed for witchcraft in Aberdeen, Scotland during the Great Witch Hunt of 1597. 2 places during this time were made into makeshift prisons for witches during the witch hunt. One of them was the Chapel of St. Mary, which was the tallest structure in the city during that time. All that remains of the makeshift holding center is a 2-inch wide iron ring embedded on a stone pillar of the St. Mary's Chapel of St. Nicholas, which doesn't seem like much. In 2016, historians were restoring the chapel and found the ring, but it seemed so insignificant they were skeptical that it was anything more than a piece of metal in the wall. But the history that goes along with the ring, and the building itself, is more than slightly disturbing. Arthur Winfield, who led the project to restore the chapel, says that this dark chapter of the city's past happened roughly 30 years after the country's transition from Catholicism to Protestantism. And it was a very scary time. Neighbors turned against neighbors, and at any moment when there was a disease outbreak, you could be accused of witchcraft just for looking at someone sideways. Aberdeen's archives reveal that the ring was installed specifically for chaining up the accused while they awaited their unfortunate fates. The frigid chapel was the suspects' last stop before they were executed and burned. The temperature was probably below 0 at the time the witches were arrested and kept in the chapel. Detailed records list the supplies that were needed for the gruesome campaign along with the price, including tar barrels, rope, stakes, shackles, and peat for burning. The city meticulously recorded the details of each suspect, who likely died as a result of baseless superstition rather than valid allegations. A mother and son were strangled and burned, and the city records note that it cost £3, 13 shillings and 4 pence to provide enough peat, tar, and wood for the pyre. St. Mary's Chapel originally served as a refuge for Catholic women to pray, but following the Reformation in 1560, it was converted into 2 sanctuaries. The church's use changed yet again when King James VI of Scotland ruthlessly embarked on the Great Witch Hunt. It wasn't mobs with pitchforks, but the king himself searching for witches. Excavations over the years at St. Mary's have revealed the remains of over 2,000 people at the site, but none of the accused witches, who were likely buried elsewhere on unhallowed ground. There were 1,000 complete skeletons, and the plan is to hold a ceremony to rebury the bodies in a vault underneath. China's hanging coffins. In southern China, there is a man-made cave containing dozens of hanging coffins suspended as high as 165 feet in the air. Weighing over 220 pounds each, the oversized caskets are all either wedged between rock openings and hanging from wooden stakes. They were put in their places as far back as 1,200 years ago by the ancient Bo people as part of a religious ritual of some type. A handful of the coffins are torn up, which experts believe happened during the 1960s, when someone discovered the site, failed to report it to the authorities, and used the wood as firewood. This is just one of several such cemeteries throughout the region, some of which date as far back as 3,000 years and house coffins up to 300 feet in the air. One site in the Guizhou province is littered with an array of ancient artifacts, including clothes, bones, and ceramics. Some researchers speculate that laying the dead to rest in a hard-to-reach place blessed them and prevented animals from feeding on their remains. Others theorize that the elevated sites were seen as a way to get the deceased closer to heaven. How the ancient people transported the caskets to their final resting place is also unknown, considering how difficult they are to get to even now, with modern equipment and technology. Remember, they are very heavy, sometimes weighing hundreds of pounds. The Bo civilization itself is shrouded in mystery as well. Experts believe that they were persecuted and mostly disappeared amid the onset of the Ming dynasty in the late 14th century, save for a few who likely assimilated into other local minority groups. Dead Man's Island. Hundreds of years ago, a small, little-known island in the United Kingdom, nicknamed Dead Man's Island, was a chosen burial site for the remains of convicts who died aboard prison ships. Situated in the River Kent, The burial site kept the bodies of men and boys who perished in crammed floating prisons away from the general public in death, just as they were in life, preventing infectious diseases from spreading and possibly triggering an epidemic. At some point, coastal erosion and tidal shift caused the remains to emerge from the ground, leaving Dead Man's Island littered with human body parts and wooden coffins. At first, efforts were made to rebury the bodies, but as the tides continue to change, the remains continue to surface and are gradually being washed out to sea. The island remains uninhabited today. It's owned by Natural England, which currently leases it to 2 people and is a protected site and a site of special scientific interest, as well as an important nesting and breeding site for birds. It is not open to visitors, but who would want to go there anyway? The Emerald Dial. In 1912, a group of workers in London made an extremely valuable discovery. They were demolishing an old building near St. Paul's Cathedral in Cheapside and got down to the cellar where they began hacking away at the bricks. Something glimmered and caught their attention. Turns out it was a wooden box chock full of treasure. There was jewelry, gems, and many other precious objects. It is now known as the Cheapside Hoard, and it is the largest known collection of Elizabethan and Stuart-era jewelry ever found. Consisting of nearly 500 pieces, experts believe the cache was hidden around 350 years ago, and more recent in-depth studies have dated it to sometime between 1640 and 1666. The story goes that a gem dealer booked passage from the Orient back to England, bringing with him boxes and boxes full of gems. Someone saw him with a diamond the size of a walnut hanging around his neck, and then the next thing you know, he was poisoned. His treasure disappeared, but some of it ended up in the Cheapside Hoard. A curator at the Museum of London said that a jeweler or a goldsmith may have gathered the collection of jewels from all over and stashed the items before heading off to battle. Nobody knows who this person was, however. While it was relatively common for people to bury their valuables during that time, eventually they came back to get them. Upon debuting the collection's exhibit in 2013, the Museum of London described it as the single most important source of our knowledge on early modern jewelry worldwide. The items consist of jewelry made from materials sourced from different continents, including Colombian emeralds, diamonds from India, and pearls from Bahrain. Included among the treasures are an emerald watch, a gilt brass watch, a Byzantine-era sapphire and pearl pendant, a gold pendant with sapphires, and much more. The emerald watch alone is considered priceless. Cut from an enormous emerald stone, the craftsmanship is incredible. Emeralds are delicate stones and fracture easily. Cutting into it and making a lid and engraving a clock right into it is incredible. But nobody knows who these incredible jewelers were, or the story behind who hid this incredible treasure. If only the pieces could speak. Sakwala Chakraya. Located in modern-day Sri Lanka, Anuradhapura, locally known as Rajarata or the Land of Kings, is an ancient sacred city and the island's first kingdom. Established in 377 BC, it remains a holy destination for Buddhist pilgrims from all over the world. Within Anuradhapura, at a 40-acre site called Ranmasu Uyana, or the Golden Fish Park, there is a 6-foot slab that is said to contain the formula for unlocking the secrets of the universe. Known as Sakwala Chakraya, which is Sinhalese for universe cycle, and nicknamed the Stargate, the artifact contains a collection of symbols that are widely interpreted to be a cosmological chart of some sort. Facing the suspected space map, there is a series of 4 seats carved out of rock. Archaeologists and historians have failed to explain the seats or the Stargate in rational terms. Speaking with the BBC, University of Kelaniya archaeology professor Raj Somadeva said that the items could date back to the 7th century, when the site's second major developmental phase began, but that the chart's origins, meaning, and function are completely absent from historical records, which are otherwise meticulous and thorough. This society kept good notes, but mentions of the Stargate are nowhere to be found. Conspiracy theorists and armchair detectives have suggested that the Stargate is a portal between Earth and outer space, and that ancient people used it for communicating with aliens, or that aliens were traveling to Earth to mine gold. Some have also connected the markings on the chart with similar symbols found at the ancient Egyptian site of Abu Ghurab and the Gateway to the Gods in Peru. Stargates are everywhere. Royston Cave. Beneath the town of Royston in Hertfordshire, England, is a man-made cave of unknown origins filled with enigmatic carvings. Measuring 17 feet in diameter and 26 feet high, its chamber is in the shape of a bell sunken into chalk limestone. It was likely once divided into 2 levels. The style of the medieval carvings covering the cave's walls has never been seen anywhere else in Britain, with the only known similar examples being in Israel and Czechoslovakia. This elaborate imagery, which is believed to date back to the 13th century, represents a series of biblical figures and scenarios, including the crucifixion of Christ and what appear to be depictions of St. Catherine of Alexandria, St. Lawrence, St. Christopher, and others. Experts can't seem to agree on who built the cave or what it was used for. One popular theory suggests that it served as a secret meeting place for the Knights Templar, or as an early Freemason lodge. Another idea proposes that the cave was built as a private chapel for Lady Rosia, the wife of William the Conqueror's steward. There are less far-fetched theories, including that Augustinian monks used the structure as a storage facility. As things currently stand, your guess is as good as mine. So who do you think built Royston Cave, and why? Let me know in the comments below. Graffiti Crosses. The walls of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem are covered in thousands of tiny crosses that, until recently, researchers believed were carved by medieval pilgrims, but they may have been misunderstood for years. A new study turned this theory upside down when it found that it was likely that just a handful of people, perhaps stonemasons or artists, covered the crosses for the pilgrims, and that the travelers kept the dust from the etching as a souvenir of the sacred site. Many of the crosses date back to the 14th and 15th centuries, several centuries after the Crusades, indicating that post-medieval pilgrims ventured to the site en masse. Study leader Amit Raem noticed during a visit to the church that the crosses seemed to be expertly carved, challenging the long-held notion that they were put there by thousands of different people. He also saw a visitor trying to etch a cross into the wall, but security and church staff rushed right over to stop the person, making him wonder who in their right mind would have permitted pilgrims to make their mark on the wall hundreds of years ago. Using advanced imaging technology, Raem and his team analyzed the crosses in intricate detail, right down to the chiseling techniques that were used to create them. Alongside the crosses, they noticed inscriptions containing names and dates, presumably indicating the approximate time periods during which the crosses nearby were inscribed. The study is admittedly inconclusive, with the carvings requiring further investigation to determine if they truly date back to the Crusades, and if medieval pilgrims kept the dust from the crosses. Mystery structure. While excavating a historic train station on the Asian side of Istanbul's Kadıköy district, archaeologists found the ruins of a marble structure covering mass graves. Located on the border between Europe and Asia, the structure is believed to have been sacred, but they don't know what it was used for, and the surrounding architecture offers no clues either. Found at the station's waiting platforms, the shape of the large structure was undoubtedly used for religious purposes. Yet researchers are confident that it was not a church, because nothing quite like it has ever been seen before. They believe they will find more answers as they continue to dig and uncover more artifacts and structures. Plus, the mass grave is something to be considered, but archaeologists don't seem too concerned about that right now. Excavations here began in 2018 when the station was closed for renovations and have yielded numerous fascinating finds from different civilizations that have lived there over the centuries, including a breakwater, 2 water reservoirs, and 18,000 coins dating as far back as the 7th century BC. A bustling trade center of the ancient world, the Kadıköy district was once home to a lavish Byzantine palace, but all it left behind were colorful mosaics and marble pieces. Archaeologists have also uncovered the remains of a 1,500-year-old church and a fountain dating back to the early Byzantine era. Unidentified stone head. Late last year, headlines detailed the discovery of a mysterious stone head at Shaftesbury Abbey in Dorset, England. Archaeologists were not only puzzled by the subject's identity, they were also unsure of the person's gender, owing to the combination of a seemingly masculine jawline and long flowing hair of a woman, according to The Guardian. The head's nose, jawline, and several other facial features were missing, possibly from damage inflicted by a sledgehammer, further obscuring the subject's identity. Because the individual is wearing a crown, researchers know the statue likely represents a royal figure. Based on its estimated age dating back to the 1340s, They surmise that the subject is King Edward II, who ruled from 1307 to 1327 after inheriting the crown as his father's only surviving son. Edward II's tumultuous reign was characterized by a Scottish defeat, being forced to surrender the crown to his 14-year-old son, and a suspected homosexual relationship, which was considered very taboo at the time. Upon being deposed, he was imprisoned and executed. The team that discovered the statue believes it may be part of a larger gallery of sculptures depicting royals that once stood at Shaftesbury. Founded in 888 by the Anglo-Saxon king Alfred the Great, the abbey was England's first religious house exclusively for women. It thrived for centuries before being closed in 1539 under the order of Henry VIII, and thereafter fell into ruins. Archaeologists have admitted that they may never definitively establish the stone head's identity, but they are still trying. Giant mounds. A collection of at least 19 earthen mounds called tumuli, some measuring as high as a 6-story building, have stood in Israel for over 2,500 years. Located in the suburbs outside Jerusalem, they are a daily sight to many locals, but nobody knows who built them or why. In an effort to get to the bottom of the mystery and in anticipation of the construction of a new housing development, the Israel Antiquities Authority recently conducted a thorough excavation of one of the mounds. Inside, they found the ruins of a building dating back some 2,700 years and several dozen stamped jar handles that they believe trace back to the Kingdom of Judah during the First Temple period. The team theorized that the site was an administrative center, but they are unsure why the biblical-era structure was buried, or if there are similar things hidden beneath the other mounds. Because the mounds are situated within close proximity to one another, some archaeologists think that their creation stems from a unified purpose. IAA Chief Archaeologist for Jerusalem, Yuval Baruch, explained that the amount of work required to build the mounds suggests that they were more than just garbage heaps or stones and earth that were cleared from nearby agricultural fields. A 1953 dig found a retaining ring wall with a set of stairs leading to a platform within, which was filled with burnt animal bones and evidence of fire. Israeli archaeologist Ruth Amiran speculated that the contents date back to the 7th or 8th century BC, and that the structure was a worship site that had been outlawed. Experts are skeptical of this theory, but lend some credibility to the idea proposed in 2003 that memorial ceremonies to the biblical kings of Judah were performed at the sites. Noting that nearly all the archaeological discoveries near the mounds are related to agriculture and administration, modern researchers have largely distanced themselves from religious theories, with some connecting the mounds to a nearby administrative center and palace that once served as a center for tax collection. Nebra Skydisk. While hunting for treasure near the German town of Nebra in 1999, a group of metal detectorists discovered a 13-inch blue-green disc featuring a crescent moon, a sun or a full moon, and 2 gold bands, one which may represent the horizon. The finders heavily damaged the artifact while excavating it and attempted to sell it illegally. Swiss authorities caught them in an undercover sting in 2003, and the disc was subsequently turned over to the government that has jurisdiction over the area where they found it. Due at least partially to its shady past, tracing the object's origins has been a challenge for researchers, who initially dated it to around 1600 BC, which would make it roughly 3,600 years old. If this is accurate, it means the Nebra Skydisk is the world's oldest known depiction of the heavens. But some scholars have challenged this proposed date, while others believe the disk is an outright fake. A recent study claims that the artifact is as much as 1,000 years younger than it was originally estimated to be, and argues that it lacks the deep meaning that researchers have attached to it. Much to the outrage of German society, the piece also asserts that the disk was not discovered anywhere near Nebra. The archaeologists who conducted the study believe that the disk dates back to sometime between 2,800 and 2,050 years ago, during the Celtic Iron Age, and that confusion between law enforcement and the people who found it have made it pretty hard to figure out where it really came from and what it means. Mysterious portrait. For centuries, a portrait of an unknown woman has graced the halls of England's royal homes, leaving researchers so baffled they have resigned to the possibility that they may never figure out who she is. Known as Portrait of a Woman, the painting in question is currently located in Mary Queen of Scots' bedchamber at the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh, Scotland. Last year, experts announced that they had finally identified the subject as Mary Boleyn, the older sister of Henry VIII's ill-fated second wife, Anne Boleyn. The painting is part of a 14-piece collection of specially commissioned portraits called the Beauties, which were likely created during the 1630s by Flemish artist Remigius van Leeuwenhoek. Oddly, Mary's portrait features 16th century clothing, while the 13 other subjects donned 17th century attire. This confusion caused the unidentified portrait to be separated from the rest during the 19th century. The team identified the painting by analyzing the age of its wood panel using a process called dendrochronology. The material came from a Baltic oak that was cut down sometime between 1651 and 1671, matching another previously unidentified portrait in the collection. Lead researcher and historian Justin Davies told the Tudor Travel Show podcast that the woman is indeed likely to be Mary Boleyn, but that one can never be 100% sure in art history because we are unable to stand at the shoulder of the painter when he's doing it. The four-tusked elephant. In 2014, a French farmer in a town outside Toulouse came across an extremely rare fossil. It was very strange and large, like a monster with four tusks. But the farmer didn't tell anyone about his discovery. Perhaps he didn't want the attention, or fossil hunters overrunning his property. Whatever the case, he kept the giant skull a secret. But a few years later, he had a change of heart and decided to phone the Toulouse Natural History Museum and report it. They came to check it out and were astounded at the significance of the skull. The bones ended up belonging to an extinct relative of the elephant that roamed France about 11 to 13 million years ago. Known as Gomphotherium pyrenaicaum, this strange creature had a pair of tusks coming out of its lower jaw and two additional tusks coming out of its face like modern elephants. The lower tusks were flat and probably used to dig for roots to eat. The reason the History Museum was so interested is that this species of ancient elephant is not represented very well in the fossil record. Previous to the skull being discovered, only a few teeth have been pulled out of the ground in the last 150 years. The farmer found the only complete skull of this type of elephant, which museum curator Pierre Deleuze referred to as practically mythical. The next step for paleontologists is to extract the rest of the skeleton from the ground. An immediate search in the area did not reveal any more fossils, and it might just be that this is one of a kind. Godzilla Shark. Scientists have finally named a 300-million-year-old fossil that they had previously been referring to as Godzilla Shark. The fossil was first discovered in New Mexico, and its teeth were so unusual that paleontologists realized they were looking at a very distinct species of animal. The ancient teeth didn't quite look like the arrowhead teeth modern sharks have. Instead, the teeth were squat and short, probably used for grasping and crushing prey instead of stabbing. This is according to John Paul Hodnett, the graduate student who first unearthed the fossil in Albuquerque back in 2013. All these years later, the shark has finally been officially designated as a new species. The Godzilla shark has been named Dracopristis hoffmannorum, which translates roughly to Hoffman's dragon shark. The name was chosen in honor of the family who owns the land in which the fossils were discovered. According to Hodnett, the area is rich with fossils and exceptionally easy to access because of a lot of commercial digging operations going on in the region. It actually took them 7 years of excavation before they could name the shark. They had to very carefully remove the layers of sediment from the 12 rows of teeth on the lower jaw of the shark, and that was only one of the tough jobs that took them nearly a decade to complete. As for the shark, it split from modern sharks and rays about 390 million years ago. These types of beasts went extinct about 330 million years ago, back when New Mexico was under the ocean. Giant cloud rats. Giant rats don't sound good, but while you might be picturing creepy rats living in the sewers and lurking around your home, giant cloud rats are actually cuddly. Native to the Philippines, these giant rats are more like squirrels, living in the trees high up in misty mountain forests. But according to new fossil evidence, it turns out that these giant cloud rats have been living in the Philippines for much longer than previously thought. Scientists recently discovered the fossilized remains of 3 previously unknown species of giant cloud rats that once lived with our own ancient human ancestors. According to Larry Heaney at Chicago's Field Museum, the Philippines has the greatest concentration of unique mammal species anywhere in the world. Most of these animals are small and less than half a pound, and most of them live in the tropical forest. The recent extinct fossil species have revealed a biodiversity that was once even greater than it is today. The cloud rats that once lived in the trees of the Philippines were giants compared to the cloud rats of today. They weighed over 2 pounds and would have been more like fat tree koalas. They may have been so large that the ancient indigenous people of the Philippines hunted them all the way to extinction. This would explain why they disappeared abruptly several thousand years ago. Ancient hedgehog. Fossil hunters in Germany have now discovered an ancient hedgehog. This isn't the most monstrous creature ever discovered by paleontologists, but it is exceptionally unique. Experts were excavating a pit of oil shale that had once been a lake formed out of a volcanic crater when they made the discovery. This crater has actually been designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of all the fossils found inside it that date back between 57 and 36 million years ago, a time when the Earth's mammals were developing at a blistering rate. The ancient hedgehog looked a bit different than how you might expect. It's true that the animal is definitely related to modern hedgehogs. So far, paleontologists have only found 7 prehistoric hedgehog fossils, making it rarer than most dinosaurs. Dr. Norbert Micklich from the Hessen State Museum, a man who himself has an impressive collection of fossils discovered from the volcanic crater, told local news sources that the find was extraordinary. Researchers were even able to identify the shape of the animal's hairs, thanks to fossilized bacteria left on the skeleton. The hedgehog was in such great condition that scientists will be able to take samples from inside the gut and see what the hedgehog ate for its last meal. Tyrannosaur pack animals. A new discovery by paleontologists has revealed some shocking information. It turns out that one of the most feared dinosaurs in the history of dinosaurs may not have been a solitary predator. I'm of course talking about the fearsome Tyrannosaur. New fossil evidence has revealed that the Tyrannosaur probably operated as a social carnivore like a wolf. They hunted in packs and were probably smarter than we think. Paleontologists came up with the theory while excavating a mass Tyrannosaur death site that they found in southern Utah at the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. Using geochemical analysis of the fossilized bone and rock, specialists from the University of Arkansas determined that the Tyrannosaurs died in the exact same place and around the exact same time, suggesting an ancient society of tyrannosaurs working together. But what's really fascinating is that according to ABC News, this is the 3rd mass Tyrannosaur gravesite that has been discovered so far in North America. More research still needs to be done to confirm whether tyrannosaurs were really pack animals or not, but it's looking pretty good for the hypothesis. Some say the tyrannosaurs definitely traveled together in rudimentary social groups, while others say they only came together when times got tough, using their combined strength to capture dwindling prey. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. The giant turtle. Fossils belonging to turtles that were bigger than cars have recently been found in South America. These turtles lived between 13 million and 7 million years ago, roaming throughout what is today Colombia and Venezuela. The fossils were discovered in both the Tatacoa Desert and the Urumaco region of Venezuela. According to the BBC, each turtle was the same weight and width of your average sedan. They lived in a massive wetland that stretched across South America before the Amazon River was ever created. But what did these giant turtles look like? Males had horns sticking out of their shells that were probably used like spears for fighting. The giant turtle likely lived at the very bottom of huge lakes and rivers, alongside some of the biggest crocodiles to ever live on the planet. But unlike the crocodiles, these giant turtles only ate little animals, loose vegetation, whatever fruit was available, and of course seeds. These turtles needed their immense size to fend off predators. The only way to fight a giant crocodile bigger than a car was to grow a shell just as big. Several of these turtle fossils were even found with giant crocodile teeth embedded inside of them. The sea monster. The fossils of a very unusual sea monster have been puzzling paleontologists for over 100 years. The fossils are that of the Tanystropheus, something that resembles the Loch Ness Monster mixed with a prehistoric crocodile and crossed with an underwater giraffe. It was first described in 1852 and was reconstructed 120 years later in 1973. Paleontologists know that the sea monster once lived in what is today Switzerland, only 242 million years ago during the Middle Triassic period. The creature was roughly 20 feet long, with half its length made up of its ridiculously long neck. What scientists couldn't figure out is just why in the world this animal existed in the first place. What could a marine predator have needed such a long neck for? For that matter, scientists haven't been able to figure out if the animals even lived on land or in the water. It wasn't until recently that scientists used CT scanning technology to reconstruct crushed skulls dug out of the dirt. The results have proved once and for all that the sea monsters dwelled in the water and that they were indeed ambush predators. The Tanystropheus probably used its long and slender neck to slither up to their prey undetected, kind of like a sneaky water snake. The Jurassic Pokemon. Scientists have found the amazing fossils of a brand new species of pterosaur, and they say it looks like a Pokemon. These fossils were found in northern China, and they date back to the Jurassic period. The pterosaur lived for a very long time in Earth's history, being some of the largest winged creatures on our planet from 252 to 66 million years ago. There were many different kinds of pterosaurs, ranging from as large as a sparrow to as huge as a giraffe. Pterosaurs were basically dinosaurs with wings. They even went extinct at the same time that the dinosaurs did. This newest species comes from 160 million years ago. It's been given the name Sinomacrops bondae. Fionn Waisum Ma from the University of Birmingham worked extensively on the discovery. Ma told Vice World News that scientists examined the fossil using CT scans to study at least 100 anatomical characteristics before they could officially label it a new species. They say the creature was the size of a pigeon and had a mouth like a frog. It also had large eyes and huge wings with thick membranes. And as for its resemblance to a Pokemon, some people are saying that the pigeon-sized pterosaur looks kind of like a real-life Zubat, or maybe a Zubat mixed with a Pidgey. The oldest octopus. Scientists from Heidelberg University in Germany may have just discovered the oldest known octopus in the world at an ancient dig site in Newfoundland, Canada. According to CTV News, researchers are saying the animal was probably the oldest ancestor of both squids and octopuses, making it the original cephalopod. Cone-shaped cells were found near Conception Bay. These fossils date back 522 million years. That's approximately 30 million years older than the first known cephalopod. This includes all classifications of squids, cuttlefish, and octopuses. What's truly fascinating is that experts have suspected for a long time that octopuses evolved much earlier from complex organisms. Until now, they never had any proof. But with these newest cephalopod fossils, experts can safely say that cephalopods originated at the beginning of everything, back when multicellular organisms first began to evolve during what is known as the Cambrian explosion. This was when life on the planet truly began to take shape. And it is fascinating to learn that cephalopods were at the forefront of this evolution. And it's even more amazing to think that over 500 million years later, these creatures are still among some of the smartest, most unique, and most highly advanced life forms on the planet. The one who causes fear. A new and horrifying dinosaur has just been discovered in Argentina. It was a meat-eating predator that struck fear into the hearts of all the other dinosaurs. This is why scientists have named the creature the one who causes fear. Translated to the native Mapuche language, it's named Yucalcan aleocranianus. It was probably the top predator in Patagonia during the late Cretaceous period because of its massive size, its destructive bite force, razor-sharp teeth, fearsome claws, and its remarkable sense of smell. This dinosaur stood about 30 feet tall and prowled the southern subcontinent of Gondwana, while the Tyrannosaurs ruled to the north. But these southern predators were a bit different from their northern friends. They had short and stubby arms like the T-Rex, but they also had abnormally short skulls that were often covered in bumps and horns. Scientists also discovered special ear cavities inside of the fossilized skulls, suggesting that they had far superior hearing to other predatory dinosaurs of the time. Unfortunately for the one who causes fear, its time ran out just as it began to flourish. The fossil evidence suggests the dinosaur had been gaining sophisticated traits, meaning it was still moving down an evolutionary pathway to becoming an apex animal. Then that pesky rock smashed into the earth and it was game over. England's ancient tunnels. There have been at least a dozen ancient tunnels found in Cornwall, England that have so far mystified researchers. These tunnels are unique to Britain and nobody can pinpoint why exactly the people from the Iron Age built them in the first place. These ancient tunnels date back about 2,400 years, and they aren't the only things that can be found across the Cornwall countryside. Cornwall is also littered with hundreds of ancient stones and man-made features, from ramparts to cliff castles, forts to cattle enclosures. Cornwall has at least 74 structures from the Bronze Age, 80 from the Iron Age, and 55 from the Neolithic Age. There are even a few sites from the Mesolithic Age dating back up to 8,000 years ago, and those are just the ones we have found so far. This place has always been popular. Throughout the years, about 150 generations of people have worked the land of Cornwall, but they left no written record to explain why they dug dozens of mysterious tunnels deep underground, often located beneath prehistoric settlements. One of the best preserved tunnels in Cornwall is a place called Hollygai Fogu. The tunnel itself is about 6 feet in height, nearly 20 feet long, and branches off into other tunnels and other chambers. But what's really mysterious is that the tunnel never appeared to be used for anything. It's simply a tunnel going from one place to another without any obvious significance. Some have speculated that the tunnels could have been used by ancient people for hiding. Others claim the tunnels are secret burial chambers. The truth is that nobody has any idea why these tunnels were made, nor why they were made to last for thousands of years. Pilsen Historical Underground. The Pilsen Historical Underground is an ancient complex of tunnels located beneath the city of Pilsen in Czechia. And yes, this is the same Pilsen that's responsible for the famous Pilsner beer. In fact, the historical tunnels underneath the city have been used to store beer for centuries. The tunnels were constructed during a period of around 600 years, from between the 13th century and the 19th century. The underground network of tunnels is the longest in all of Central Europe. They were first made to transport water and sewage, but were later used for dealing with beer. But the reason for the complexity of the tunnels goes back to the beginning of the 13th century. It all began when citizens in Pilsen began to build cellars deep beneath their houses, which they would then connect together with tunnels. People used these cellars and tunnels to store food and other supplies, including beer. By the time the 19th century rolled around, Pilsen had over 12 miles of underground passages and one of the most complicated and advanced sewer systems in not only Czechia, but also much of Europe. Unfortunately, the tunnels eventually became ignored. People didn't use them anymore, and it wasn't until archaeological interest unveiled some curious artifacts from the Middle Ages buried in the remains of the crumbling tunnels that anyone took an interest in the Pilsen Historical Underground. Today, you're able to explore many of the tunnels to see what it looked like during the city's peak. Have you ever been there? What was it like? Let me know in the comments below. Tunnels to the Mexican underworld. Researchers working with the National Institute of Anthropology and History of Mexico have discovered a unique set of tunnels leading beneath an ancient pyramid down into a previously unknown underworld. According to the INA, the researchers discovered the tunnel system underneath the tomb of King Pakal II in the ancient city of Palenque. The tunnel is fairly small, hardly large enough for a person to walk through without feeling like suffocating. An inscription on King Pakal II's tomb stated that a god was to guide the dead into the underworld by submerging them in water. The tunnels were most likely created to serve as a symbolic guide to lead Pakal to the afterlife. This is the same King Pakal who was found inside a sarcophagus with a carving of what looked to be him blasting off in a spaceship. He was discovered in 1948, wearing a jade mask and bead necklaces. But judging by this new tunnel evidence, archaeologists are certain that King Pakal did not, in fact, blast off into outer space. Instead, he was probably sent spiraling down into the earth. The tunnel network found underneath his tomb had likely been some sort of drainage system that the ancient Maya thought would help lead the spirits of the dead down into the underworld. The city of Palenque is famous for its architecture, temples, and treasures. The Temple of Inscriptions is one of the most famous monuments of the Maya and was the funerary monument for Pakal. The newly discovered water channels are still being excavated, and it looks like there is still much to learn about engineering and burial customs of the Maya. Underground Europe. There is a mysterious underground network of ancient tunnels stretching all across Europe, from Turkey to Scotland. And as of right now, researchers don't really know why they are there. According to the German archaeologist Dr. Heinrich Kusk, who actually wrote a book about these very tunnels, they were dug under hundreds of Neolithic settlements all across the European continent, and their construction began as far back as 12,000 years ago. This same archaeologist claims that because so few tunnels actually survived throughout the ages to be discovered and explored, the real network of tunnels across Europe was probably much larger than what the evidence of today shows. In Bavaria, there have been almost 2,000 feet of underground tunnel networks discovered, with another almost 1,000 feet being found in Austria. Most tunnels are very small. They are only just large enough for a single person to crawl through. Some have small rooms and some have storage chambers. But the suggestion here is that Stone Age human beings didn't just spend their days mindlessly hunting and gathering. They did indeed start building things, and they may have started with these strange tunnels. But unfortunately, researchers have been unable to determine whether the ancient tunnels ever came into contact with one another, creating an underground network of passages beneath Europe. And just as equally unfortunate is that nobody has been able to figure out what the tunnels were used for. Ancient Mesopotamian cult tunnels. The city of Ani is over 5,000 years old, but until recently, nobody really paid any attention to it. But there is an entire underground world mentioned in ancient Mesopotamian texts, and it turns out that they are real. Located on a hill, Ani is on the border of Turkey and Armenia. This city rivaled many of the ancient world for its large size, urbanization, and magnificent buildings. At its peak, Ani was known as the city of 1,001 churches and the city of 40 gates. Thousands of years ago, this city was more affluent and influential than even Cairo or Baghdad. It was a huge deal in the 11th century, with a population of over 100,000 people, but it was eventually run over, destroyed, and ultimately abandoned. The hundreds of churches that once glistened in the light are now in ruins. Excavations have revealed hundreds of ancient churches, Zoroastrian temples, secret water channels, a secret monk cell, massive corridors, and intricate tunnels. The area has been inhabited since ancient times, from at least as early as the Bronze Age. More evidence has been discovered since then. An inscription found underground revealed that the subterranean tunnels had once been used as a special esoteric school by the Mesopotamians, showing just how old Ani really is. There are about 823 underground structures and caves inside Ani, including food shops, stables, water reservoirs, and even tombs. The city may have been more impressive below than it was above. The Catacombs of Rome. Under the streets of Rome, there are underground burial chambers and spooky tunnels that most tourists don't get to see. The history behind the strange and mysterious Roman catacombs is fascinating. The catacombs were used by early Christian Roman citizens between the 2nd and 5th century as a place to bury the dead. At the time, Romans practiced the pagan custom of burning their deceased. This was a common way to get rid of a dead body without taking up space or needing to buy any land or build an underground cemetery, but the Christians weren't having any of it. So the Romans allowed them to stockpile their dead in the underground tunnels, and as Christianity spread, so did this burial custom. By the end of the 5th century, the catacombs underneath Rome spread like tentacles beneath the ground for several miles. Inside the tunnels, niches had been carved in which corpses were put to rest. The body would have been wrapped in a sheet, stuffed into a niche carved out of the tunnel wall, then either covered with a gravestone of marble or baked clay, before finally getting the deceased's name carved onto the stone. And because during this time Roman law prohibited burying dead people inside the city, all the catacombs can be found today slightly outside on the original city walls. Before the year 313, when Christians stopped being persecuted, the only place they could bury their dead was here. Then in the 8th century, when Rome was invaded by barbarians, much of the catacombs were destroyed and pillaged. Daring Kuyu Underground City. A man was renovating his home in 1963 when he accidentally discovered a tunnel that would change everything. The man tore down his wall, and he found the ancient opening into an underground city. And today, you've probably heard of Daring Kuyu, the Turkish city in Cappadocia where thousands of years ago the residents lived in an underground beehive. After breaking into the tunnel entrance to Daring Kuyu, archaeologists were alerted to the man's discovery. What they found behind the wall of his house was an elaborate subterranean network of ventilation shafts, interconnecting passageways, and so much more. The ancient city had hidden entrances all over the mountainous region. It was probably used by the ancient Hittite culture to protect themselves against attack by the Phrygians, especially between the 15th and 12th century BC. Either that, or Daring Kuyu was built by the Phrygians after they defeated the Hittite and stole all their stuff. But how was this underground city formed? It was carved out of the rock and is currently the deepest underground city anywhere on Earth. It has about 8 floors and reaches a depth of 280 feet below the surface. There are miles of tunnels here that have been blackened by centuries of people walking through them carrying torches. There are churches, livestock stalls, and even schools set up inside the underground city. There was even an early irrigation system that transported drinking water to the people living underground. St. Peters Cathedral. In St. Peters Cathedral in Germany, there are 8 naturally mummified corpses currently on display inside glass coffins and housed within a creepy underground crypt. The mummified corpses were discovered in the late 17th century when an organ maker was given a small part of the basement crypt of St. Peter's Cathedral to work in. The crypt had apparently been used originally for storing renovation materials, including lead. The naturally mummified corpses were probably preserved in such immaculate condition because of either the lead in the air or the extreme dryness of the crypt. The corpses had been sitting there underground for about 400 years. When they were discovered, nobody really knew why they were there. But eventually, each corpse was identified. Here's what we know about the creepy corpses found in the underground tunnels beneath the cathedral. One mummy belonged to a man who had been killed and then mummified with his mouth twisted open in a soundless scream. Another of the corpses was a murdered student, another was an English countess, and the other was the Swedish administrator for the very cathedral he was discovered in. His wife's body was buried there too. Today, you can see these incredible mummies petrified in the dark and dank tunnels beneath the cathedral. Edinburgh Vaults. The Edinburgh Vaults are a series of scary tunnels leading beneath the city of Edinburgh in Scotland, where disturbing vulgarity and all kinds of mischief once ran rampant. To understand the vaults, we first need to take a look at the city itself. Edinburgh was constructed on a series of hills. Today, the only hills visible from the city center are Castle Hill and Calton Hill, with the castle perched nicely on Castle Hill. The other hills are invisible thanks to bridges built in the 18th century, masking the valleys that would otherwise break the city into small islands. The most famous of all the bridges is South Bridge. According to Historic UK, it was constructed in the late 1700s as a way to connect Old Town's High Street with the university on the other side of the city. To build the bridge, one of the poorest quarters of Edinburgh was destroyed and the bricks were used as recycled material. But here's where all the skullduggery comes in. The area around Southbridge became very popular. Space for businesses began selling at a premium. People started to build businesses all along the South Bridge, and its economy trickled down into the dark and vaulted chambers of the bridge itself, far below the street. These underground spaces became a hive of activity, but then everything slowly changed yet again. The bridge was not waterproof, meaning that most of the businesses became flooded. Illegal trade eventually prospered, and the damp and dark vault became home to the poorest and worst people in society, including mercenaries and body snatchers. Today, the vaults have a dark and very dismal history. The tunnels have mostly been sealed off due to the danger, and have been voted one of the most haunted places in the world. The Shanghai Tunnels. During Portland's industrial heyday around the 1850s, there was a phenomenon known as Shanghaiing. This was when a man would be kidnapped and sold as a slave to a ship captain who needed extra crew members. To facilitate this disturbing crime, tunnels beneath Old Chinatown, nicknamed the Shanghai Tunnels, were used to sneak illegal goods and people between the city and the ships, including the Shanghaied victims. The tunnels created a huge labyrinth with many entrances and exits. The labyrinth was also filled with underground brothels, opium dens, gambling houses, and illegal prisons. The Shanghai tunnels are still underneath Portland today and can be seen as part of a walking tour. The tunnels may not be that ancient, but they are an excellent view into the illicit activities that went on during the early days of the American port town. Thanks for watching! Which of these tunnels would you love to get lost in? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe before you leave. See you soon! Bye!